So I'm joined today by George Martin, Senior Content and Community Producer for Which, and also on Building Safety Faces, an impacted leaseholder in a building below 18 metres. So hi George, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Yes, there's going to be a lot to talk about, especially with under 18 metres.
Absolutely, and we've been weirdly thrown together in this situation for probably 5 or 6 months. I'm thinking that we first met, and I was conscious that it happens with me, but also with you, that what I wanted to bring to life with this sort of video series is the faces behind the Twitter accounts. So I've either brilliantly or stupidly called it Building Safety Faces, as a bit of a play on building safety cases, which we might touch on later for tall buildings and the new regulations. But want to sort of go through just very quick, simple interviews with the faces behind the Twitter account. So you're kind of my guinea pig interview number one in this series. So for anybody that's looking at this, then apologies in advance. We'll see how it goes. This isn't my day job, producing content like this, but I'm really keen to chat to people like yourself, George. And so I understand, but before we get going, can you talk us through your role then, and sort of how you've been involved in, professionally and personally in the building safety crisis up until now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, personally, I live in a building under 18 metres. I've lived here for 2 years now. I couldn't move in because of the ground rent scandal. It took me 18 months. And then finally thought I had a dream home, as everyone does when they finally move into a property. And yeah, lived here sort of relatively carefree for around 18 months, nearly 2 years, until the cladding situation sort of reared its head. We knew that there were people in the building, couldn't sell, couldn't remortgage, like everyone's going through. And then, so we had to look into getting someone in to do the survey. And that's where things started to go wrong in quite a big way. And it's been a bit of a saga since, which I'm sure we'll touch on soon. In terms of professionally, I'm the editor for Which Conversation, which is community content website. It's almost like a combination of a blog and a forum, really. It's where we publish content doesn't quite fit with some of the other channels, and we have comments enabled on the site as well. So it's a discussion that can take place underneath each piece. It's also a place where we regularly host case studies, and anyone who wants to feature as a guest in any emerging situations or consumer themes that are coming up. So obviously building safety feeds into that quite significantly, which is why I've been able to host a number of the pieces you've probably seen and read, focusing on various different buildings around the country that have been impacted in pretty dreadful ways, some worse than others, but all really terribly. So I'm trying to promote as much as possible and use that platform to get the word out and spread awareness.
Which we definitely need, because if we look now, we've still got, just before we started recording, more Twitter followers that appeared from new blocks that I've never heard of. These are large blocks that are going public now that they've got problems. And
yeah, exactly. The Daily Mail campaign launching yesterday or the day before, it's been fantastic, and that's the sort of coverage that this needs and deserves. And I think everyone's pointed out the fact that if it wasn't for the pandemic and for the Brexit drama that's been ongoing for nearly a year now, and Brexit even longer, of course, this would be over the front pages a lot earlier than it has been, and it's finally getting the coverage that it definitely deserves, because this is a gigantic scandal in the UK.
It's a massive story, and it's one that people sort of come up to me now, that's neighbours and things, it's like, oh, heard you talking about this on the radio, or I read something. That's what you do, isn't it? Saw something on the BBC, not about me, but and I think it's that cut through that, even if you're not directly involved, to think, well, that could have been me a few years ago. It could have been my kids. It could be my brother or sister. And then I think the more broad implication of what that might mean to housing chains and housing sales. And, I think personal view is this affects everybody in some way.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think so. Yeah, I think for the mainstream media that have managed to convince editors to get this some prominence, I think is great, but that doesn't sort of underplay the work that you've been doing for months and months and months to raise awareness and build this momentum. And it's been an eye-opener for me, sort of learning how much work goes on in the background for these things we're talking about now to become stories, you know, to give them that credibility and that
Yeah, I mean, you are absolutely right that everyone will know someone. And I think you mentioned that a lot of people were saying, well, that could have been me. I think there'll be even more out there, and it will be them, and they just don't know it yet. There were people in my building who only found out about a week ago, and this has been ongoing. So we slipped into the sort of rather bigger drama area of it around 6 months ago. And if the managing agent isn't regularly speaking to people, and we know how bad some of the managing agents have been throughout this crisis, then there'll be people sitting in their flats who aren't looking to sell, they aren't looking to remortgage. So they're carrying on living their lives as if everything's absolutely fine, when the reality is that within weeks they could be hit with a Section 20, or they could suddenly find themselves with people in high visits walking around their buildings without being told that they were going to appear there.
Mm. So there are a couple of things just to unpack there, that just in case anyone's seeing this that isn't aware. So number one, let's talk about Section 20 notices. So, I mean, can you talk us through your understanding of what that process is, just in case anybody hasn't heard of it, and how it relates to fixing or remediating a building that may have some building safety issues?
Yeah, I mean, well, speaking as a leaseholder, I mean, I'm not an expert in Section 20s or leasehold law by any means, but as someone who would receive a Section 20, my understanding is that leaseholders need to be consulted if there's going to be a spend over a certain amount. And pretty much anything building safety related is going to exceed that amount by a quite unimaginable degree, whether it's for waking watches or the remedial itself, or of course building insurance, which is going to hit my block in the next couple of months, I'd imagine. So if you're served Section 20, it basically means that there's going to be a big spend coming your way, and it is billed as a consultation period for leaseholders. But I think the fact is that the spend needs to happen regardless. So you can give your feelings, your thoughts on spend, but this isn't like replacing the car park lights. This is critical safety work that needs to be done as soon as possible. So you can object, but the work's got to happen. And if you can't afford it, well, then that leads to absolute disaster. And I think we're seeing some of that disaster unfold now.
Yeah, and I think that just on the fact that it's safety related, it can be fast tracked through the tribunal process as well if you do disagree.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the key points, that without being realistic about this, without wanting to scare everybody, the implications of not complying, not paying those bills in relation to leasehold law and forfeiture and all that sort of stuff is, I think really from what I'm seeing, is only just starting to land now in terms of consciousness about what this means when you don't comply with the terms of the lease. However unfair it is, the default position is, what does the contract say? You know, where is the legal position? And the legal position isn't necessarily fair. I think that's a real concern that I have, and we've seen with a few people that are well known in the cladding community or the building safety community that have had some significant financial issues and bankruptcies, etc. already, and they're the ones we know about. And I think probably the Twitter audience is probably, if it was 5% of the total, it would be a lot, probably, in terms of what we're talking about.
So I think that leasehold law generally has a lot of problems anyway, and we know that from people struggling with ground rent or inflated service charges. But I think the leases that we signed as buyers were never designed to start having millions funneled through that service charge, and you would have never envisaged a situation as a buyer where anything like this would have ever been taking place. I mean, we are generally responsible for the maintenance of the building, and I think everyone would say yes, that's a fair charge. You live in the building, you use the communal areas like the lift and so on, always, you're making use of those. But when you start saying, well, you're now responsible for the structure of the building, well, that's something that no one signing these leases ever had any responsibility for or role in, and they have no way of checking that when they sign those leases either. No point in the conveyancing process would you have been able to check the external walls, because you don't own them. So, I mean, that's the massive part of what everyone's arguing here, is that you can't say you don't own the walls if you want to check them, but suddenly when there's a massive issue has come up elsewhere, you suddenly are responsible for them. So they're having it both ways on the liability side, and I think that is the real injustice of the whole situation. I think people are struggling with the most is that this does not make sense, and it's going to cripple people who just do not deserve it.
Absolutely, and that's the key thing about fairness in all of this. And a conversation with somebody yesterday about the talking about further survey work in their building. And this guy was really worried about the fact that they were going to do some intrusive survey work inside the building for compartmentation. So again, for anybody that just sort of break the jargon down, this is about fire stopping between flats, both above and below and to either side. So not the external wall, but all the other faces of your flat or your compartment. And his view was, I really want to know whether my building is safe or not from that perspective. But in another way, I don't want to know because it's going to add money to I know it's going to add money to my remediation bill. And there is no glimmer of funding from government for the internal works at the moment. So we can come on to sort of whether you're 18 meters or above and whether you get funding, but also what type of problem you've got. So there's this sort of kind of squeamishness, if you like, about what am I going to find? I kind of want to know. And I sort of equated that to the fact with me, that's going to the doctors to get my blood pressure checked. Because I always know that with my family hereditary issues, at some point they're going to say you need tablets, and I don't want the so I kind of hide away from going, but I really do need to go to the doctors and get that checked. So unless there's some kind of indemnity that says, don't worry about it, George, we need to make your building safe. We need to know everything that's wrong so we can risk assess it, but you're not going to foot that bill. That is going to be covered. We need to make sure you're safe. And I think, to me, that in terms of where the government are going, really we should be saying, first and foremost, we need to make sure everybody's safe in their homes.
Yeah, that's a big starting point. I mean, but we both know for a fact, working on this together for the last 6 months or so, that the government either hasn't or refuses to grasp the true scale of what's going on here. And I think that they, along with the general public, I suppose, as well, is still looking at this as a cladding panels situation. I mean, and what happened at Grenfell was tragic. And I think a lot of the focus, though, in the media covering it more generally has been on those panels and how the panels spread the fire. And I think the word cladding has now corresponded to those panels. Yeah. And I think a lot of managing agents, the public, and even leaseholders as well are thinking, well, we need to get our panels checked. And they're not realizing that when they have someone in to do this survey, they are checking those panels, of course, but when those panels come off the wall, well, how they're attached to the wall is the installation right, like the render elsewhere in the building. And as you say, cavity barriers either missing, installed incorrectly. People aren't realizing just how much there is to this. And I think when that extends to the government as well, that's why I've got the situation we're in. It's a Pandora's box of sort of failed regulations being opened, and it goes so far beyond panels. And that's the situation we're finding ourselves in. And if the Building Safety Fund is only seems to really be covering a small subset of those issues, and one of them is, of course, the panels, then other things are going to get excluded and left behind. And all of a sudden, you're left with remedial works for a whole multitude of things that you never expected. So I think, people just need to generally realise that this goes beyond panels right into the external walls, and they're going to find things out that, well, I'm fearful of, because I mean, my situation at the moment is that we believe the panels comply for a building under 18 metres. But while that's positive, what's going to be found when they take those panels off, we just don't know. And the way it's going at the moment, and what we're seeing, if 9 in 10 buildings really are failing, then the chances of passing, well, 10%. So it's not good odds.
We wouldn't want those odds, no, absolutely. And I think the government in their response to Grenfell haven't helped themselves in terms of not really grasping the scale of the problem or the scale of the issue, but also setting us on a path that of almost zero tolerance to risk, which has now meant so many blocks that we would probably look at and say, well, actually that risk can be managed effectively. We just need to tweak a few things, and now effectively being condemned. So they've almost built their own monster. And really what should have happened is we should have ranked each of these buildings against each other and said, okay, what does safe look like? What score is that out of 100? And then how do each of these buildings compare to that score? And what do we need to do to bring them to within what we would call in the trade the sort of the risk appetite? Now you can lower that number over time as we make buildings safer, but what you don't do is create a monster of non-compliance and then think, how on earth are we going to pay for this? Because it almost seems to me as though there was never really any consideration to the cost. and the cost to me is a factor, because if you are going to sort of ruin leaseholders in the process to pay for all of this, it's kind of no point in having a safe flat if you've thrown yourself off the balcony. There is a cost associated with all of this, and it really doesn't appear to have been sort of looked at in the round. And I don't know whether you've seen anything that sort of is contrary to that view, but
no, I'd agree. It doesn't like an impact or risk assessment was carried out on firstly looking into how safe the buildings are in the first place, but also then again the EWS1 form itself, when that was introduced just over a year ago now, and the way that would not only impact people's lives, their finances, and the buildings themselves, but also the property market. And if lenders won't lend on the bottom rung of the ladder, and people can't move on, they can't staircase it, they're in shared ownership. People who bought a flat probably did so, especially in London as well, because they couldn't afford to buy a house. In which case, that's what getting on the ladder is all about. Is moving into a property you can afford. It should, in theory, gain some value in the years you're there, and then hopefully you can use that equity you built up to buy a house. And then you've got, in property market terms as well, is the chains that are now collapsing as a result of that. So the damage it's going to do is the property market, and I think again the Mail's done a good job exposing this in the last few days. It's going to be astronomical, and you have to bring that into some sort of impact assessment before you pretty much declare every flat in the country to be unsafe. It's gonna have ripples quite majorly, and it's going to affect people further up in the housing market as well. And I think we're going to see that now.
So the issue is now that genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah,
I don't think we can put it back in. I think it would be an unbelievable U-turn. It's a bit of a schools are safe, oh no they're not, 12 hours later kind of U-turn, in the sense of turning around and saying, well, we know we told you that your building was unsafe and you couldn't mortgage it, but actually we changed our mind and now it's okay.
Well,
so
that's exactly what we discussed when that press release was rushed out in the last couple of months, when they attempted to say that buildings without cladding shouldn't have been part of the cladding scandal. But we can't just pretend that those issues that have already been found aren't there. And it's exactly what you're saying as well. Again, the genie's out of the bottle. You cannot now say, well, maybe those ones are fine after all, because now the insurance industry, we know, has already got cold feet. We know that the lenders have got cold feet, and saying don't worry about it, it's not going to wash.
Well, you can sort of understand from not that I'm here to defend lenders or insurers, but I can understand commercially why, if I don't have any faith in what I'm insuring, or I don't have any faith in terms of what I'm lending against, you can understand why they would want some satisfaction to sort of say, well, actually, this has been checked by a competent professional, and actually it's okay, I can go ahead and lend or go ahead and insure. That's not to say that there isn't sharp pricing going on, or we can probably spend all day talking about that, but I can understand why, if you undermine the fundamental regulatory system and prove that was ineffective, why if you had cars, for example, I like to car analogies, but if somebody was to completely undermine the Euro NCAP test regime for cars, and all of those cars that have got 4 or 5 stars, you're now questioning, should they have any stars at all? You can understand why you would want further testing with a new regime. So it's effectively what's happened. And to my mind, the orchestrators and the regulators of the regulatory system are the government over decades. And the government are put there by us, taxpayers. So to fix this, taxpayers need to stump up. And if we can pin the tail on a few donkeys along the way through the courts, and in terms of insulation specifiers that massage the system and potentially broke the law, or construction companies that didn't do as they should have done, then that's good. We can recover some of that cost. But having this standoff, personally, I can't see a resolution to the standoff unless leaseholders turn around and say, here's my 100 grand, and everybody in the block does it, or 50 grand or 30 grand. And I just can't see, even if some will, I can't see everybody doing that.
No, and well, it's not possible for a start. And the standoff, you're completely right. This can't go on forever, and the buildings won't be made safe. And something that I was going to bring up that you've brought us on nicely to really is the fact that not everyone in the building is going to be able to pay. And then going back to impact assessments, well, what happens then? We've got 41 private flats in this building. What happens if 20 of them somehow say, well, yes, I can get, for example, the 25k needed somehow? I mean, not everyone's going to have that sort of money lying around, but if half the building says it can, half says it doesn't, then what happens? And we discussed the human impact as well, but these remediation projects are going to take years. They're going to take even more on top of that, when you consider that people will be saying, well, yes, we've got half the building to pay, what's going to happen with the other half? They're going to forfeit their lease, so they're going to take it to court. Will they be able to take it to court? Because they would have their money drained by waking watch charges and other interim measures, fire alarm systems, and so on. Yeah. So that will drag on even longer. And all that time, you've got people who have maybe divorced, you've got people who've got families on the way, you've got people who have had children, more children, stuck in a one-bed flat. You've got people who want to move, like Abby in Leeds, for example. She wants to move out, start a family, buy a house. There are people sort of mid-30s is probably the sort of home ownership range you're looking at as well in terms of buying a flat. They're all people who are ready to move on with the next stage of their lives, and they can't. And it's absolutely tragic that this has ever been allowed to happen. And the human cost of it is utterly horrendous. And we've seen that in certainly the articles that I've been writing, editing, publishing, and in the stories we've seen across the media elsewhere. It's just a horrible, horrible situation. Absolutely nobody deserves.
No, and it's sort of looking through the different options of whether there could be some kind of buyback scheme, but I don't know how you would administer that in terms of, because I think probably everybody would say yes, or apply for it, and we're back into that. So, and you hit on a really good point, George, in the sense that even if we were to wave a magic wand and say, here's 30 billion, 50 billion, whatever the number is to put all of these buildings right, there just aren't the trades, the scaffolds, the materials. Somebody's got to wait, which is back to this point again of, if I can do 10 a week in terms of remediations, where are my most dangerous 10 buildings? Where are the next 10? Where are the next 10? What does that program look like?
Yeah, the data's just not there, is it?
No, and at the moment, even with the Building Safety Fund, you've got this situation of first come, first served, effectively. So if you had a amazingly diligent managing agent that put all of the information together perfectly, that star coincided with getting to the right person at the Ministry of Housing that wasn't off sick and wasn't busy or away on training or taking time off for Christmas, that processed it really quickly, you could pop out of that machine first, and your 5 million that you need or whatever comes out of the 1 billion. However, if you've got somebody that's slightly slower than that, you may well be at the point where you're at the last 5 million in the fund, and there's 20 buildings just like yours. Now, how do we start to choose? And inherently, my view is we should have been funding the most needy buildings first and working our way down, to make sure, ultimately, if we were trying to make sure the most people are safe as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But if you don't have an objective measure of how safe something is, you can't compare.
No.
So I think one of the balls has been dropped there, personally. I would be looking at that. And I think that's, from what I can see in the industry, that's what people are looking at. If you look at large housing associations, etc., they'll say, well, we kind of understand, we're assessing the risk, and we will work through a program based on need, highest risk first, which is one of the problems why, when people are sort of saying, I need an EWS1 and it's outrageous, my housing association haven't done this for me yet, and they're in a 10-metre block, I can sort of understand why. If I can only do 20 a week and I've got 2,000 properties, where do I start?
Yeah.
And typically they will start at highest risk first. So, that's something that we haven't thought through, but it's not helpful for somebody that's in a lower rise block that's waiting and waiting. I think the other point I wanted to raise, which is one that hasn't really come up yet is where we've got buildings that have been through remediation projects but still can't get that magical sign off. So I won't name them on this, but there's a few blocks in Manchester like that, for example.
Yeah, I'm aware of one. Yeah,
and you really have got to question that, having been through having the face ripped off your building, millions of pounds being spent, new cladding put on the building, new insulation, that you're still at a point that the construction sector and the design sector that managed that project on behalf of those residents still hasn't been able to deliver a building that can be signed off as safe for whatever unknown reason it is at the moment. So are we, if we go through all this remediation, actually going to deliver compliant, safe buildings, even at the end of those projects?
I mean, I think it depends who did the initial survey and what they recommended for a start. And we've touched on fraud before, and we've worked together a lot on some of the situations we've seen. But it really does come back to who decided what remediation work was necessary, what were their qualifications, and were they taking sort of holistic view of the entire building and its height and what risk would be posed, and how is risk being dealt with. Because if you have someone assessing the building, and don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely not an expert in this at all, but if they've got a list of materials and they've been told those materials are banned, and if they apply that exactly as it sounds to a building, then you will see many failures. But I know from speaking to fire engineers that just having a certain type of material doesn't mean that there's going to be a failure. And fire engineers have told me as well that you won't find a building in the country, you won't find a building potentially in the world that hasn't been built with some sort of combustible material. So how do you define risk for one building? What is the risk it truly poses? And if you've got someone who just thought, well, that material is a bit of a risk, it's some concerns have been raised, buildings to fail straight away, then that's a concern, because it may not be the case. So it really does depend on who's assessed the building in the first place, and what they've recommended. And also the change of regulations is happening not regularly, but we are seeing regulations change. So post Grenfell and in between, and then advice notes issued that are being picked up upon as we go. So if someone's done a big remediation project, say 2017, 2018, 2019, who's to say that remediation project will comply come 2022, 23? So that could potentially be why we're not seeing buildings signed off even after remediation has gone on. And again, it brings us back to that point we made about the panels. If just the focus on the panels has been made, but they haven't looked at the other things behind the walls, then if it does have an intrusive survey again, then it could be that more issues are found. And again, Pandora's box. I mean, where does it stop? You need someone that really knows their stuff, a really experienced, competent fire engineer to assess it and tell you exactly what the risk is, I think. But again,
of which we know there are. Yeah, of which we know there are not very many.
But exactly, yeah, and even fewer insured as well.
Yeah. So from a consumer perspective, actually, this sort of leads me on to something I haven't spoken about for a while, but did when the Building Safety Bill was first published, the draft Building Safety Bill, and that was to do with the. We described it very quickly as an assault on leaseholders or an attack on leaseholders. I can't remember exactly why, but the main reason for that was the fact we were moving from an inadequate rules-based regulatory system to a risk-based regulatory system. So without going into the boring detail on that, it's effectively, there is a mechanism within the Building Safety Bill that says, as an accountable person, so the responsible person for the building, you need to effectively manage the risk in the building on behalf of the residents, and the costs associated with managing that risk you can pass to all of the residents through the building safety charge. So you think, right, okay, well we looked at that as an open blank check, if you like. But what you've just described in EWS1 is precisely that, is to give that grading, that B1 grading, so flammable or combustible materials in the external wall, but the risk is managed sufficiently, therefore no remediation required, is a risk-based judgment. And if I'm a fire engineer that's potentially going to lose my house by being sued in the future, the incentive is for me to have a very low risk appetite.
Yeah.
Yeah, which means I will fail your building because I'm not going to get sued for that, or I'm less likely to get sued for it. But is that necessarily the right conclusion? Probably not in a lot of cases. And I think the same thing will happen with the building safety charge, that, you know, potentially a new alarm system could come out that's really sensitive and is much better for detecting certain fires in certain instances. And I might think, well, actually, if there was to be a big fire in this block and I didn't specify the new fire alarm system, could I be liable? Therefore, I think we should upgrade the fire alarm system, and that's going to cost all the leaseholders £3,000 each. And I've got a mechanism to push that through the service charge for payment within 28 days with no questions asked, because it's a safety item. So it really is an open-ended sort of blank check that is very cleverly worded to effectively keep buildings at pace with new developments in safety and new thinking. So a different type of fire could occur in another block, and we could say, well, our building would have had the same outcome, so therefore we need to upgrade the lifts now to a firefighting lift, for example. That's going to be £2 million for the block. So ultimately, if I'm that accountable person for the building, I'm going to do everything within my power to not get myself put in prison. But I can do that at the expense of you guys.
Yeah.
So that is the fundamental problem, I think, with the building safety bill, which again has gone a bit quiet at the moment because everybody's sort of focused on Amendment 13 of the fire safety bill in terms of indemnifying leaseholders. Maybe, maybe not. That will pass. That's fraught with problems. But we have this building safety bill looming later on this year, which I think is far nastier and far more expensive from a leaseholder perspective, potentially.
Yeah. Well, what I think you've just sort of done really is and show is why the cladding building safety crisis has exposed the leasehold system and its inadequacies. Because you're talking about putting through sort of untold fire safety charges, but any charges can go through that service charge, generally for the maintenance of the building. And you could find yourself hit with anything sort of at any time. And I think when you're a buyer, and especially a first-time buyer as well, you don't really think about that sort of thing. I think you're keen to get onto the ladder. You're keen to buy a home, and it's probably more likely to be a flat, especially if you're younger and you are lucky enough to be able to buy somewhere. Well, I say lucky. I wish I'd be nowhere near it now. But yeah, you don't consider these things, and you're told, well, the service charge is X amount, and it's gone up slightly since it was built, but not a lot. And you think, well, okay, well, that'll be the service charge for the duration I'm there, because I think if you buy a flat, you don't expect to be there more than 3-4 years anyway. Because again, like we spoke about earlier, you're at a certain stage in your life where fantastic, you've got on the property ladder, but that's quite a small part of where you're planning to be in the next few years, especially if you're early mid-30s. You're going to end up moving out, having children, and so on, starting a family. So you don't consider that the service charge is going to inflate like that, and maybe you could tolerate, a couple more hundred pounds every now and then, perhaps, but sending thousands through. I mean, I think we've seen service charges now up to sort of £10,000 a year to take account of waiting watch, take account of buildings insurance, take account of everything else that's happened. You would just never have thought this would have come up, and no conveyancer would have really told you that either. And what I would have said, yes, service charge can increase. They wouldn't say, oh, but be careful, because by the way, there could be £10 million going through it in a couple of years. Because if they had said that, people would have said, well, absolutely not then. I'm not going anywhere near a property like that. And that is leasehold.
Yeah, in a nutshell, it's very well written from a freeholder or landlord's perspective. I mean, in terms of the scope to move, and the just on building safety bill. I mean, just sort of thinking that through. I mean, one of the other things that isn't talked about is that the two areas of risk that are included in the building safety case at the moment are fire, which I think everybody's aware of. The other one is structural integrity. So let's just take a building like the one in Crawley this morning, last night, that was evacuated for a gas leak. It's an 8-storey building, so it would be within the scope of the new regulator, and it has gas supply into it. Okay, so with gas, we get the explosion risk. Buildings like Ronan Point, gas explosion decades ago, blew the external walls out, building collapsed. Lots of people died. So if you're in a block that you then get structural engineers in to build the building safety case, so the structural engineers come in and report and they find there's a weakness in the structure, a bit like there's a building in Croydon that's still prohibited and being refurbished because of structural frame problems.
I think I can see the building from my window.
Right. Okay. I'm not going to name it, but know which it is. If there's an issue that's found in a structural investigation around structural integrity, again, in theory, the cost of putting that right could be recharged through the building safety charge. But at the moment, because nobody's risk assessed it, we don't know there's the problem. But the moment you've got to put forward a building safety case to the regulator to say, this is how we can demonstrate this building is safe from a fire and structural integrity perspective, you could open another can of worms at that point. So again, we have to get the structure right in terms of indemnifying leaseholders. And I think my caution would be we've heard some rumours that there may well be some movement coming fairly soon on the so-called building safety fund from the government. I really would strongly urge them to properly think this through in terms of the numbers, because I can only see this number growing hugely. If we turn around and make the cladding situation a bit fairer, we're then beyond to insulation and cavity barriers, we're then going to be on to internal compartmentation, structural frame issues, fire alarms, whatever it is, these things will grow and grow. So we need to have, I don't think we can continue with this sort of once a year we release a little bit more money. I don't know whether you've seen, but the 3 cladding funds were all a year apart. So May 18, May 19, May 20, with the 3 chunks of money. We can't carry on with this every year. We release a little bit more cash that's inadequate. Then we
it's not working. Yeah, it's not working now. It's not going to work when they release the next set of money, or after that. I mean, people have estimated it's potentially a £15 billion problem, and releasing 30 million for a Waking Watch fund. I mean, I think I mentioned on Twitter that that's not going to help many buildings at all. If you're looking at an average of £20,000 a month Waking Watch, and there are, I think it's more than 700 in London now on its own. So you're looking at maybe 30 million helping 150 buildings maybe. And then so London itself gives you a relatively good estimate of the country overall. So
looking ahead and conscious of time, so we're in the first few days of 2021. We've got some vaccines for COVID. We're all locked down. We've got the Daily Mail doing great work in terms of raising awareness, and the Telegraph and LBC and Sunday Times, and there's some momentum there in terms of media awareness, and obviously BBC and ITV, and not deliberately missing anybody, which of course. What are your thoughts for 2021 in terms of this, getting some kind of resolution to this massive problem? I mean, where are you? Are you half empty, half full? Where are you on the positivity scale, from bearing in mind we're in the first few days of the year?
I mean, I was half empty the other day, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think the Daily Mail has made me more half full now. I mean, I want to be quietly optimistic that I can sort my own building out and get a resolution across the country. And I think that there is a lot of momentum now, as you said, behind the campaigns that have been launched, which is fantastic. And seeing it on the front page, I think it's really given a lot of people a lot of hope. But it is a huge problem. And yes, someone famously mentioned the magic wand a while back, and as you say, even if they did have one, you're still looking at a long time to get people out of these buildings, and that's a concern as well for me, because it's the human cost. People need to get on with their lives, and you can't have people sitting in unsafe buildings, but you also can't stop them from living their lives as well, especially if they want to start families and things like that, moving on with stages of their life. This is just grossly unfair. But in terms of it getting sorted overall, I think the Mark Hartland-Smith amendment to the fire safety bill is huge. We're seeing more MPs back it now. I got my own to sign it the other day, which is brilliant. And it's cross-party. I mean, I know it's a very political issue, but this affects every single MP in every constituency, no matter what party they are. They need to be looking at this as a grossly unfair situation, and there's no arguing against it, really. It is unfair, and yeah, I don't think making it more political than it needs to be is going to help, because there shouldn't be one party having a line against another party. Absolutely not. This is people's lives being directly devastated by something that is not their fault, and that's not up for debate. It just isn't. Yes, you can say they signed leases, but we've discussed already that leases were never meant to cover anything like this. And this is a failure of regulation, and it's a failure on developers' part as well. And I think, in my opinion, if a building is found that it's failed because the regulations went up to scratch, then the government should cover it. And if it's found that it failed because of defects in the build by the developers, and then signed off by whoever did building control incorrectly, then they should cover it. So you've got two pots of remediation there immediately. I'm not saying one party should have to shoulder the blame for all of it. And we've seen some councillors argue on Twitter that if a developer wasn't responsible, then they shouldn't fix all the problems. And it's hard to disagree with that as well. So as I said, if it's a failure of regulations, the government needs to take responsibility and pay for that building. If it's a failure of the building itself, then the developer should pay for it. And if these buildings are so unsafe that they have to have people standing there looking at them all day, every day, then people shouldn't be living in them. And that's when the insurance and the warranties should kick in. And that's when the developer, I think, should even consider buying them back, because you cannot have buildings that have to have people standing there watching them because they're so unsafe. I mean, when you say it out loud, I mean, I think we're so used to being in lockdown now for the last nearly a year, we're all typing away, talking on video. But when you actually say it out loud to somebody that a building has someone standing there looking at it 24/7, it just sounds ridiculous. If it's that unsafe.
I think what makes it more ridiculous is the reason they're standing there looking at it is because there isn't a fire alarm in it. Putting aside the evacuation manager role that's been dreamt up, it is an absurd situation, whichever way you look at it. You know, the fact that how one or two people could wander around a 20-story building and spot anything in any kind of timely manner, who knows? I mean, I think I've come back recharged from the Christmas break, if you like, thinking, yeah, we can't solve all of the problems, but there are some positive things we can do. So hence why we're doing this kind of thing. And I would encourage anyone that would like to step forward and have a quick chat with me and get it recorded, because I think the more stories we share, the better, the more we can support each other. You know, I'd like to see, aside from the funding thing, which personally I can have a view on, but I can't do anything about, what I can do and push for example, one of the things I'd like to do this year is I want to get somebody to put together some kind of project plan that says, this is how we're going to remediate these buildings. So back to that point of the magic wand, solve the financial problem. We've got lots of money. How are we going to spend it, and in what order? What does that mean to people? Does it mean that there's certain buildings that are just beyond redemption and need to be compulsorily purchased and demolished because the cost of putting them right outweighs their value? Yeah. I know, okay, that's people's homes and that has to be dealt with, but you know, if they really are that dangerous or that beyond redemption, you know, where is the plan? Unfortunately, we're at a point now on the negative side where we've got a Ministry of Housing that doesn't even know where these buildings are or what they're called. So to be able to risk assess them is impossible on the basis that they've still got the fire brigade going around till the end of 2021, trying to visit all of these buildings if they can find them and submit basic information. So we're out of kilter in terms of expectation that because we haven't bothered to gather the data over the last 3 or 4 years properly and take the problem seriously, we now can't make informed decisions. And I say we, the royal we, the government. So one of the things I'll be agitating for is the fact that we've got to gather this data quickly. We've got to engage residents to do that, because I think the people that know these buildings the best are the people that live in them.
Yeah,
somebody to
I absolutely
crowdsource.
agree with that. You can become an expert.
Well, I mean,
your
that's
own
the point.
building.
So yeah, so I have a construction management degree. Don't practice anymore, but that's what I did at university. And the amount of residents I've met that can talk me under the table on technicalities when it comes to external wall systems and cladding and cavity barriers and everything, and BSs and BS 8414 tests and all of the stuff that's going on that we're talking about in the Grenfell inquiry. So we have a highly engaged, highly informed audience with a vested interest to sort this problem out, because at the moment they're staring at large checks. Why aren't we engaging with residents properly? And again, the royal we, government, to work together to solve the problem. But I think the inhibitor to that is there needs to be an element of contrition from the government's perspective to say we are a significant part of the problem as well as a significant part of the solution. So let's all give each other a hug and spend 2021 getting this sorted.
Yes.
Could be pie in the sky, could be completely unrealistic, but I think it's worth going for. I think there are a lot of housing associations and property managers now that are sort of saying, we've got to get this sorted. We've got to work together to get this sorted. So I don't think it needs to be a binary us against them, leaseholder versus managing agent kind of relationship. Ultimately, it's not good for their business to have forfeitures all over the place and gaps in service charges and grief to manage. It's not good for the leaseholders. It's not good for anybody. My parting shot would be if 2021 can be collaboration,
yes,
and acceptance of the problem, then if we can all work on that, then great. Hopefully we'll get somewhere. But trying to be positive.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to see that collaboration from the freeholders as well, and the banks who have already lent on these properties that they say are so unsafe they won't lend on anymore. It's ridiculous. I mean, I've got a mortgage with a bank who's lent here on this flat, but they won't lend on the flat that's a sale down the hallway because it's too unsafe. So it's not good for anyone, as you say. It needs sourcing. It's a horrendous situation. And it needs collaboration. And you're right. The audience and the people behind the campaign have been fantastic. Whether they're starting the cladding groups, whether they're puppets, there are a lot of very, very informed people behind this campaign who are doing a wonderful job raising awareness, and that's why it's on the front page of the Mail. It's why the Sunday Times picked it up. It's why LBC has been so great. It's because the people behind it know what they're talking about, and they are really driving it very, very well. And I've been so impressed with the people I've met. And the people behind, as I say, that the campaigns have been wonderful. So it's there are positives, and there are things to look at this year. I think that we can make some real progress. So yes, I think to answer your question earlier, I'll be a glass half full person. I think.
So I think then if we can move to, it would just be lovely to be able to move into the solution phase. That at the moment, all of this campaigning effort is about acceptance of the problem and finding money, and rather than how can we all work together to get everybody as safe as possible, as quickly as possible. How do we deploy this money? How do we deploy better ways of risk assessing? How do we gather better data that we can do that isn't in this sort of, how are you going to use it, adversarial, are you going to use it to sue me or as a stick to beat me with kind of method? It's more a question of saying, we need to make this happen. We need to make people safe. Yes, you might be a developer that's hiding behind a statute of limitation, but the reality is that building was built by your company. It's your reputation. Yes, maybe you can hide behind the law, but there's doing the right thing. And I think we need more people to step up and do the right thing without being forced to. And maybe we'll get some.
To drag these companies through the courts, especially if there are issues from the build where the building control staff has effectively been deceived if they haven't done what they said they were going to do. They need to take responsibility for that. And I think I've said a number of times now as well. I mean, I said it in the magazine column, I said it on the podcast, but I think everyone agrees that fire safety is absolutely paramount and it's priority for everyone. You can't have people in these homes feeling unsafe or being unsafe. But doing this work, it can't come at the financial, mental destitution cost of people who didn't cause it, and their only mistake was doing what they were told to do was the best thing, which is buy a home. It's not fair. It's it's unbelievably unjust, and that it needs to change. And I think if the industry accepts that mistakes have been made and we'll start working together, then we'll see some solutions. But until then, it's going to be a struggle, and there's going to be some tough times ahead this year as well for people. In my own building itself, in the next couple of days, I should be hearing back from our fire engineer. So it's going to be difficult, but as you say, there are some positives to look at, and the momentum we've got now as well is a big part of that.
That's fantastic, George. Well, thank you very much for your time. Just before we part, if anyone wants to look you up, obviously we're talking about Twitter here, but so in terms of, can you just run us through how people can find you on Twitter and how people can find you on other social channels, and how to hit you up if they've got an idea or a story or something that they're worried about?
Yeah, sure. Twitter is the main outlet for me. I'm at George Rob Martin. I'm on LinkedIn as well, pretty easy to find. You search George Martin, which magazine, so on, should come up. But yeah, definitely Twitter's the place to go for me. It's where I'm most active and doing all of my personal campaigning. So
brilliant.
Yeah,
well, thank you very much, and I wish you all the best for 2021. Look forward to working with you this year. Hopefully we'll be able to get out and celebrate sometime soon that this is all behind us and we're putting things right rather than just shouting at people into the void.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I hope so. And if we get this sorted, then I'll see you in the pub post-vaccine, I think.
No worries. I'll look forward to it. Take care.
Excellent. Right. Cheers, Matt.